Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, April 15th, 2024, and the board meeting is now called to order. It is 6:04. Tonight, we have directors Harnish and Richardson joining us online, and Director Chandragiri and Student Advisor Herzig Gutierrez are absent. I'll hand it first to Student Advisor Papas to read the land acknowledgement.
We are gathered today on the land of the Kalapuya, who are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Round and the Confederate Tribes of the Siletz Indians. The relation between the Kalapuya people and the land continues unbroken to this day, and we offer gratitude for the land and for the generations present and past who have stewarded the land since time immemorial. We respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Native American and Indigenous students and staff of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. We invite you to join us in honoring these ancestral grounds and celebrating the resilience and strength of all Native American and Indigenous people.
Thank you, and if we stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Do we feel really off today? Do we have any agenda modifications, Superintendent?
No, we do not.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Just wanted to give a brief welcome before we jump into our agenda. And I do want to say I love hearing the little ones in the background. So just that little voice, to me, it's just really grounding. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. We'll hear from our district team in a second around their reductions, but I just wanted to start off with a thought and reflection that I've had not just today, but it's been weeks, and just thinking about how back in, the moment that I decided to run for school board, it was my ultimate hope to make a positive impact on the learning and sense of belonging of students and to support every one of our educators. I do believe that this is what most of us who are serving in education desire, learning environments that are full of love and full of joy. However, as we've learned about the education funding in Oregon and other states, and of course in our district, it's been difficult to not feel the frustration, the heartbreak, and the uncertainty before us. Through clear communication, we have learned, we've been in these conversations learning around and understanding the difficult fiscal situation that we face. And for months, we've been foreshadowing essentially, right, this moment in which we sit before. So wanted to share that because it's difficult, it's emotional, it's heavy, and this evening we will hear from the district team around an overview for their reduction recommendations and then take the time necessary to hear public comment. And just want to close with, it's difficult. The cuts are painful, far from anything that we would want to do, and we understand them as necessary as well. And I do hold on to hope, and hence why the little voice in the background to me is grounding this evening, and that hope that our children and students will continue to thrive in our community, that they will continue to be cared for and held, and that we together will rise from this difficult situation and challenging moment stronger than ever. So thanks again for being with us this evening, and with that, I'll hand it over to Superintendent Castañeda.
Thank you. Can I do a quick tech check to see if we can get you're working on it, the deck up? Thank you. I will build a little bit off of the chairperson's comments. This is an evening that, and in fact, this week is a week that we've been forecasting, and at the same time, I think many of us have been worried about, and I'll speak for myself and say even dreading, because Moments like this are the reasons that we know we have to come together, and at the same time, these are also the kind of decisions that often threatened to pull us apart. And the feeling of wholeness of our district is really the product of all of the relationships of all of the people. And so we do all of this with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of responsibility, because we must safeguard the future of our district. And right now, the future of our district includes safeguarding the financial future of the very near term. Tonight, we are going to give you an update on where we are financially. We are also going to walk you through the recommended round 2 reductions, and then turn it over to the board for discussion and questions. So let's take a little bit of a tour back in time to July 2023. We have looked at these graphs many times, but I want to reintroduce them to us and have them be the beginning and the end of tonight's conversation. This takes us back to July, the very beginning of this fiscal year. And this graph tells a story about an urgent need for a financial turnaround. And this is the story that we started with. And a couple of things that I want to share with you about this graph. First, you can see that if you look all the way over at the 2024-2025 side on the right, what you'll see there is the difference between that orange and blue line. That's the amount we were projecting to spend more than we were bringing in as a school district. That is an enormous gap for a district of our size. And in fact, it's the fundamental signal that we needed to start making changes. When you spend that much more than you bring in, there's really only one way you get by year to year, and that's spending down your savings account. For a district, our savings account is the ending fund balance, and that's that black line. And you can see how as we started spending more than we were bringing in, the amount in that savings account started to crash. The story here is a district that was doing okay in the moment, but needed to make changes before the end of the 24-25 school year. And so that's what we started together. In July, we immediately took action. We started to freeze spending, freeze a lot of our hiring, and we started to reset all of our expense habits, just the way you do with the home budget. Things that we could stop spending money on, we stopped in the moment, and we also started to plan to stop for the future. And in just one quarter, we did some good with this budget. So can I ask you to go to the next slide? So this is after the second quarter. And a lot happened in that quarter. So this moment represents the period after we made the first round of recommended reductions. That was in December, and that was 31 million. And if you don't notice anything else about this graph, I would like to point out 2 things. First is you see how that black line, our district savings account, you see how instead of falling, it started to level out a little bit. That's what financial health looks like in an ending fund balance, because it means you're not spending your one-time money to cover your year-over-year expenses. The second thing that I want to show you is that you can see that that gap between the orange and the blue line, it started to get smaller. And that's because we were recommending significant reductions and adjustments for this and for next year. This is the halfway point of our story. This is also before we finished bargaining. And that means that we didn't know exactly what our personnel costs were going to be. Our personnel costs is the value that our staff deserve in their paychecks. The story we're telling today is not about staff being overpaid. It is not about having too many staff. It is a story about not having enough state funding to support the needs of our school system. We were so pleased to be able to offer the raises that were just ratified in the last 2 months. Our staff deserve every cent of that. And it changed our expense profile. So let's move forward to some new information. This is Q3. Q3 means we just wrapped it up. So this is new to the public and new to the board. What you can see here is that with our new personnel expenses, you can see that orange and blue line all the way at the right. You can see how it popped back open again. It popped back open to about 55 million there, and I'm sorry, to about 45 million there, and that means that that's how much, even with the December reductions, even with our new spending habits, even with our vacancy savings accounted for, that's how much we were going to spend more next year than we're bringing in. That still can't be a place that we leave our district. The action that we're taking this year is so hard, but it sets the stage for what can be possible next, because it safeguards our future. So the slide we're going to look at next is what this looks like with the round 2 and 1 recommended reductions together. This is the full 71 million. And I want to show you just a few things about this. This is an incredible amount of financial work for a school system to do in 1 year. This is usually spread over multiple years, but there is one silver lining for sure that I can see. And that is that we do it together in 1 year, and then our system can focus on recovery. When we make cuts like this over many years, every year people wait and fear for the next round. So we can complete our recovery this year and our financial turnaround this year and focus on recovery. With the 71 million that we have presented as a recommended reduction, I'll just show you a couple of things about this graph. You're now very familiar with it. First is, look at how we've pulled the gap between our expected expenses and our revenue together. It's now down to 19 million, the smallest gap of any graph we have showed you this year. That means that if we spend every cent that we budget, we will still spend $19 million more next year than we are bringing in state aid. That means we are not completely closing our gap. We're leaving almost 20 of it there. But that's okay, because we've done what we can for this year. And we'll keep working on this next year. The other thing we want to show you is that the ending fund balance in the very first chart, the ending fund balance was negative next year. And you can see we've pulled it back up into policy standards. $67 million in a district savings account, in effect, is about 6 weeks of payroll for us. That's not too much for a district of our size. That's about 6 weeks of operating cash. That's safe, but it's barely safe. These reductions are extremely painful, and the reasons we got here are several. But before I hand it over to my colleagues, I will name just a few. The first is the state funding formula is in desperate need of work. Desperate need of work. The state's estimates for our and every district's rate of personnel cost over 2 years was a little more than 5%. We more than doubled that. That was wrong. It was a grave calculation error. And it's not just Salem-Keizer. If we look around, Portland is projecting $70 million in cuts next year. Jervis, Bend, all over the state. we're seeing districts start to experience distress. We are protecting ourselves now because we must, not because we wish to. A second reason that really matters is that as a community, we are funded significantly less than our wealthier northern counterparts. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but for right now, the important thing is that we know that there are certain fundamental unfair elements of the way schools are funded in Oregon. And we can work on that together, but for today, it's still true. And then a third thing that I'll raise, and I know you've heard it, is that the federal recovery money for COVID, we all used it for the right purposes. We used it for families and students. And those families and those students still need the services that that money was paying for, but it ends in September. And that means we and everyone else in every other district in the country is making adjustments. So if you hear the question in the world, how did this happen? The answer is that things happened all at once, not just to Salem-Keizer, but to Oregon, and to a certain extent, the nation. So we take these hard measures now, only because we know that there is a better chapter coming. Can you advance to the next slide? If we were going to only look at two graphs that tell the story of the hardest part of this year, it's these two. It's the comparison of the July forecast and what we're recommending and building tonight. This tells the story of how we make things tight and we make things right for now until there's more money and we can do better. Okay, with that, I believe I will be passing it off to Dr. West. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Castaneda, Chair Guzman-Ortiz, Director, Student Advisor. I am going to spend a little bit of time sharing with you how we went about prioritizing those things that we wanted to preserve through this process, which ultimately then led us to the recommendations that you'll be hearing about in just a few minutes. To start with just a little bit of context, reductions of this magnitude require that we spend a little bit of time among ourselves and also with the community thinking through what are the priorities that we have already identified as a district and invested in. We began with our board goals, which you see outlined right at the top there. These are familiar to you. We have brought these into the boardroom multiple times. Our board goals are aligned to the longitudinal performance growth targets, which we co-created with the Department of Education earlier in the school year. In addition to our board goals, we identified programs and positions that are critical to the students in our district who have been historically underserved by school systems. We also prioritize students with exceptional needs that have emerged since the pandemic, which we have brought into this boardroom as well to have conversations about. For example, students with acute mental health needs. That is the application of our equity lens, which you see at the bottom of the slide there. And those are the student groups and the programs and positions which, through the use of our equity lens, we have prioritized, again, to preserve to the extent possible. But that wasn't enough. If you switch to the next slide, please. Again, with reductions of this magnitude, it was critical. We were compelled to go out to the community to ask, what are the things about the school experience that our community valued? To this end, we held a community conversation in the fall. That was an in-person event that we held at each of our comprehensive high schools and invited the community in to have conversations directly with us. In addition to that, we conducted a survey and targeted focus groups during the month of March 2024. In total, we collected more than 5,600 discrete input points that we also used to inform what are those things that we will prioritize for preservation through this reduction process. What we heard is summarized there on the slide in front of you, but just to highlight a few things. We heard from our community that experiences in the school, such as are provided by music, athletics, art, CTE, rigorous courses, and fine art electives, these are experiences that our community wanted to protect. We heard that in addition to these experiences, our community wanted to protect safety and security, as well as mental health supports. One thing that I want to elevate is that through these conversations and the survey that we conducted, we also saw some alignment with our board goals. For example, the community shared with us that one of the things that they really appreciate about their students' school experience is the relationship that students have and the sense of belonging within their school community. And our community told us that among all of the board goals that were identified, the sense of belonging and students reading by third grade, they elevated as most important. So again, the combination of the board goals, the application of our equity lens, and then the conversations and the data that we collected from our broad community led us to prioritize for preservations the things that you see on the next slide. And I won't go through and read this to you. The areas that you see there on the slide should look very familiar to you in that these are the focal groups, the programs, the positions that we have brought into the boardroom time and time again to elevate in importance. Because these are the programs that our students, our families, our staff, and our broad community tell us lead to great experiences for students. With that, I want to share with you the first look, the setup for what our reductions will look like, if you'll change to the next slide here. Before we can talk about where we're actually reducing staff, I think it's really important that we anchor ourselves in what is the composition currently of our school district. The pie chart that you see there, the data that you see on that pie chart were pulled on 11 April, so just a few days ago. And you can see that between our classified and our licensed staff, they comprise 97% of our workforce. The remaining 3% of our workforce are comprised of administrators, and among administrators, and when I say administrators, I mean supervisors as well. So among administrators, 2% of those administrators work directly in our school environments with students on a day-to-day basis, and 1% comprise department supervisors and other administrators working throughout the district. We have previously shared that costs associated with staff constitute 86% of our general fund budget. And as of our Q3 update, which you saw a slide just a few minutes ago, 90% of our general fund budget is comprised of staff costs. So they have continued to escalate. We do not believe our schools are overstaffed. You've heard us say that throughout this whole process. Yet, because staff comprise our largest expenditure, we must reduce the amount of people who are working in our system. So with that, I will turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Idosanata, who will take it from here to share an overview of our recommended reductions.
Thank you very much. So the slide that you have up here, what it represents is the scope of our overall recommended reductions. And it also illustrates the personnel, the overall personnel reductions for round 1 and round 2 combined. That's 392.75 FTE. Now below that, you'll see the distribution of our personnel reductions. You'll see that there's 13.1% represents the district administrators. 4.9% represents building admin, 4.9% are classified staff, and 8.8% are licensed staff. The sum percentage of the district administrative proposed reductions at 13.1%, I want to point out that that's about 1.5% or 1.5 times the number of any other group represented up there that we're recommending for reduction. If you look at the two boxes below, you'll see that it represents vacancy savings. Vacancy savings are when positions in the budget are not filled and no one occupies those roles in those job groups. So for our classified vacancy savings, you see a representation of 70.8 FTE. And for our licensed vacancy savings, you see a reduction recommended for 38.5 FTE. Can you transition to the next slide, please? So on this slide, it looks a little small, our apologies, but what you see is a representation of the areas where we're recommending to save $40.4 million. That's broken down in 4 different areas. 3 of those are personnel costs, and the other area is where the superintendent already described how we're saving in terms of efficiencies, reducing our spending in certain areas, and more. So I'll talk a little bit about the administrative costs. They represent $1.5 million, and it's 8 FTE in the second round. There's 15 FTE total for our administrators, and that's spread across both our district level and our building level. Now, the other areas, I'll let Deputy Superintendent Cobb explain license reductions with a greater description of how we recommend reductions in that area, and you'll be able to see the slides much better. Deputy Superintendent Cobb.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Guzman-Ortiz, board members, student advisor, and Superintendent Castañeda. Like Dr. Udosenata explained, I'll share in the next few minutes the recommended reductions for our license group. In this slide, you'll see that the recommended reduction is 231 full-time equivalent positions for rounds 1 and 2 of the reduction. As a reminder, we have about 38 vacancies in this moment. Dr. Udosenata just mentioned that, which will lessen the impact on the number of positions or number of moves because they are vacancies. As mentioned before, we have built some protections in the recommendations based on the feedback that we have received. And an important change that we want to mention tonight based on the feedback is that we are reinstating 2 nurse positions that were identified previously in round 1 and were communicated back in December. Other more specific protections that we were able to maintain in this licensed FTE reduction are current ratios at the elementary level. We have heard over and over from our community and from our staff that those ratios are elementary are very important, so we are trying to maintain those. There are also important protections for music programs, athletics, career and technical education programs, and then some protections for mental health and social-emotional learning in schools. With these reductions, we will be able to, again, support the ratio, but this also means that we will lose some of the outside supports that we have received in the past couple of years, like the additional K-2 literacy support at elementary. If you remember, we had some of those coming to schools through the ESSER funding, or some of the co-teaching strategies at secondary schools. Included in this license group are also 2 specialized positions that you see listed there. One of them is instructional levels, and that position will be impacted at all 3 levels. The recommended reduction that we are bringing to you today with the instructional mentors will mean about 70% reduction to the specialty group. For program associates, which is the last name of position listed there, they are also included in this FTE recommendation. They are licensed teachers who step out of the classroom to support the system in different departments for different work. An example is curriculum, for the curriculum adoptions that we bring to you here. or special education, title programs, or other specialties like TAG, our Talented and Gifted program, or library media. And I'll now pass it to Bob Silva for reductions for classified.
Good evening. So the recommended reductions for classified includes 114.25 FTE from both schools and departments. Some of the school level positions impacted by the recommended reductions include instructional assistants, additional hours that were added to school-based health assistants using the ESSER funding, which is sunsetting in September, and a reduction in the number of instructional support assistants and graduation coaches. Department-based reductions include a variety of clerical and administrative support positions, custodians, and vacant positions from many different classifications. A few examples of the reductions buffered by those vacancies include bus drivers, special programs instructional assistants, mechanics, and senior secretaries. We've also identified an additional $2.5 million reduction in technology spending and department and program budget cuts. Combined, these recommended reductions total $10.4 million. Superintendent?
So we heard information there that shows how it is that we make the move from the last time we presented to you to tonight. And the information that shows the story of how one, in a moment like this, gets to a point that our district is more financially secure for the very near term. We're also very near the end of this fiscal year and the end of this school year, which means that these decisions are not only important, they're also urgent for our system. They're urgent because our schools need time and our staff need information. Everybody needs to know what's happening next year. Every impacted staff member needs to know where they're working and what they're doing. Our leaders need to know how to build a schedule that works for their students and their staff, and our students need to know their schedule. These are all things that happen in the coming weeks. In addition to those things, we also will be bringing the budget for next year to this body in addition to the budget committee. And the recommendation that we bring for the board's consideration tonight and for their action tomorrow forms the preliminary basis of next year's budget. And that is how we find ourselves in a situation where between today and the end of this school and fiscal year, there are really important decisions to be made that will have a lasting impact on our district. These are decisions that help either regain stability or continue to wobble and teeter into the next year. We know that this is very hard. We've spent weeks talking to individuals, members of our teams, members of our schools, our associations. There are not great options, but there are responsible packages, and we've done our best to bring that to you tonight. So with this, I believe we will now turn it back over to the chairperson and to board discussion.
Thank you, Superintendent Castañeda and team. We'll take board questions, and I know we have Director Richardson and Harnish online, but questions from the board? Discussion overall. And Stovin, if, I can't see hands, so if you can let us know, okay. Yes, Student Advisor Papas.
As a student, I know how important mental health is within our schools, and you mentioned before that there are projections being put in place for the social and mental health within our schools. I'm just kind of curious as to what these protections are.
Yes, we have heard, for example, the need for behavior specialists or some of our instructional assistants who have additional training and they support in schools for students in the sensory areas. So those are some of the positions that have been considered to stay in the schools as much as possible. Counselors too, social workers included.
You have a question, Director Hudson?
Well, thank you for that question, because I think that's one of the most popular topics, and it was interesting to get to ask many questions as you're with you guys being so available over the course of the last several weeks specifically. I wish that it were as obvious to the public of what I've been able to learn on this side. I wish there was a quick way for me to share. I feel like it's truthfully, I can say, been looked at some more. And with the structure that we've seemed to come to the conclusion of, it seems like there's not a way around it, but it doesn't mean that that area will be deprived. That was one of my biggest concerns there. And so, like was mentioned earlier, there was some adjustments made on nurses and things like that. And I'm hopeful as to what it seems that with other things that are in place to help with the transition of all of this, that will, that things will turn out, I guess, okay. And I look forward to adding more later on. But I wanted to say really quick, in case I don't get the other opportunity, I know after questions, a lot of folks disperse. I truly cannot thank you all enough, honestly, for showing up. So many of you faces we see time and time again, and I know it takes time from your schedules, and we appreciate the comments that were sent, because that's what this is about. Your word and your questions and your information do mean so much. And I've been able to share a lot of those and discuss them over the last weeks of folks that have emailed and have shared questions just from the public and community as well. So every question I've seen, I've asked about. And anyway, I just appreciate you all taking care and time. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Hudson. Second Vice Chair, do you have? No, did you have?
Yeah, I have some questions.
Okay, go ahead.
I guess I have some questions related to budgeting in general, and then some other ones, so I can start with the budgeting ones. When we're talking about the ending fund balance, can you help us to understand what types, why is it important to have such a substantial ending fund balance, recognizing that it's not super substantial to only have 3 weeks of payroll? That sounds really scary, but could you kind of illuminate, what are the types of situations that a district might find itself in where you need to have, I think our policy is between 5 and 15% or something like that in the ending fund balance? Just want to understand more around that.
Absolutely. And Erin, if you could help us by going to the last slide in this deck, then we'll have a visual anchor. So we'll just focus on the one on the right, which is the one that includes the recommended reductions. If I remember correctly, I think that 67% puts us right in the vicinity of about 9%, which is right in the middle of our policy targets. And There's a few things that are really important about this. The ending fund balance, I'll again say it's easiest to think of it as your savings account. And just like in a home budget, there's the idea that it's best to have 3 months saved in case something happens. In a district of our size, this is here in the event that there is an unforeseen emergency. And this allows us to be able to weather that emergency. I can give you a hypothetical example. I don't know if it's ever happened in the state of Oregon, but it has happened in places I've been. There have been situations where, for a variety of technical reasons, the State Department of Education has not pushed through state funding on time. And I've even been in situations where it is as much as 3 or 4 weeks delayed. Not here. But when that happens, districts have to continue to make payroll. We can't stop paying our employees because of a problem above us. And so this is here in the event of a situation like that. There are other things that can happen to a district that are extremely surprising, and when times are tight, you need to have a place to go. And even in the tiniest example, I'll say that the winter snowstorms and the ice storms were not terrible for us, but they were pretty terrible for Portland. They could have been that way here. That was millions of dollars in unexpected damage in one storm. And we need to have plans, contingency plans, for any change or slowdown in funding, for major facilities issues, for major surprises that are by their nature unpredictable. Hitting the middle of our policy targets keeps us safer. It keeps a buffer that helps ensure that if something happens in the world, it does not fall on the backs of our employees.
So maybe it's worth kind of reiterating the basic output of expenses per month, and then what our savings should look like, what's average, what's good, and where we end up based on these calculations falling for the future.
As a rule of thumb, we spend about 40 million a month as a district. So what you can see here is, well, a negative 38 is impossible, so we'll ignore that side of the graph. You actually can't have a negative ending fund balance. What you'll see here is that this is, it's about 6 weeks of reserves for our district to continue operating. And it puts us right at the midpoint of our policy range, which is, Bob, is it 7
to 12%.
7 to 12. And so this puts us at 9, right? Like kind of pretty much right smack dab in the middle.
Oh, no, I don't have any. Not right now. I'm good. I don't know if, feel free.
Okay, I just wanted to express gratitude for the restoration of the 2 nurses. I think that's really important. For me as a director, I appreciate seeing the priorities that the public had and that we as a board had and that the district leadership had around mental health and behavioral health supports, that positive sense of community and well-being in our schools, sense of belonging. So when I see something like school-based health assistance on the list, my mind goes to kind of social determinants of health being foundational to make sure that kids can stay in school, be healthy in school. And we know there's such high poverty in our district that causes me a lot of concern. We're concerned about any reduction. Obviously, everybody feels like we don't want to be doing this in any shape, form, or fashion. But I guess, my question is, are we anticipating negative health outcomes with this type of reduction? What can be done to mitigate the loss of that support in our schools to make sure we're not seeing declining attendance rates or disenrollment or worsening graduation rates and that type of thing.
The recommendation on the school-based health assistance was amongst the most difficult of the ones that you see tonight. And I want to actually go back to something that Bob Silva, I think it was, said. This is a reduction of hours across many people, not the complete reduction or elimination of positions. But nonetheless, the hours matter greatly because the hours are when the work gets done. Our school-based health assistants are very important parts of our office teams. And they do important things related to everyday health. They support our nursing teams, they support our office staff. But they're also very often the people that students know when they come to the front office. They're there to help. They're people who families know as well. So this is a very difficult reduction recommendation. On this one and others, I'll start by just being honest that we will feel this as a loss. At reductions at this level, we can make contingency plans, but we cannot make up for the loss of people. I think that I don't know that I can predict whether it will or will not have adverse health outcomes, but I can predict that it will have adverse office outcomes, and the office is the nucleus of a building. I'm going to actually ask Deputy Superintendent Cobb to talk a little bit more about the everyday dynamic and maybe answer some more of your questions about the health outcomes.
Thank you. Something to add is that, like Superintendent Castañeda said, they play an important role to help manage some of the health plans that our students have. If a student needs medication around lunchtime, this is the role of the health assistant. In the past, before COVID, we had about 2 hours at every school, and they were in the office around that time. Usually that's when kids start coming to the office to follow whatever guidelines are in their health plans. Some of those are taking medication, some of those are to do a check on blood levels, all guided also through our nursing department, or some guided through our nursing department. When we all experienced COVID, we needed to increase these hours because if you remember, we needed someone to help us with all of the protocols related to COVID, having kids, having the counts of how many days has the student been out, checking on fevers, calling parents and asking families for the, to follow protocols or supporting with protocols or connecting with testing organizations or later testing in our schools. So they became a critical component of our safe and health systems to respond to COVID. And then after that, we just got used to having somebody who helped us with everything else. They don't have to do all the same protocols, as you all know. So again, the reduction will be felt because they are out in recesses or lunches, or they go to classrooms to support. They know the kids, they know the families, but the service of the health supports will be reduced back to about 2 hours to allow for those systems that we experienced before COVID.
I also want to check my understanding, but I do believe that this 2 hours across our school-based health assistance was federal recovery funded. And it's just another example of the difficult decisions. We need the services, we need the people, but we no longer have that money.
Just one follow-up on that if no one else wants to jump in. Nope, go ahead.
I have one question, mostly just because I think I heard it somewhere around, or maybe it's just a talking point in the community about a reduction of counselors potentially. Like I see in this list that we've got graduation coaches, but I don't see anything that specifically calls out counselors or social workers.
recommended reduction does not include any counselor or social worker positions.
Thank you. I was just following up on the school-based health assistant work. I understand that we don't have all the protocols related to COVID anymore, but it just seems like what we keep hearing in the community is there's just as many needs that students have that aren't necessarily COVID related, but even in elementary school, just a lot of other, behavioral or mental health concerns popping up. And so I don't know that we capture that data on what the health assistants are helping with every day, but if we do, is there sort of a decline in some of those duties that helps us to know that 2 hours will be sufficient? I know it won't be sufficient no matter what we do, but going back to pre-COVID, like, is there something you're seeing that makes you feel more confident that we'll be able to handle those issues?
I'll start with it won't be sufficient, and the loss is a very hard loss. And I'll also add that there's a team at schools that is comprised of a community outreach coordinator in most of our title schools, if not all of our title schools. We have someone who helps families with connections with some dental providers, medical providers, supporting families to get organ health plan if they're not in a plan, or the counselor helping families connect also with some of the community organizations that support us for clothing, or getting in touch with our McKinney-Vento program in the school. And then for behaviors, we have one of the programs that we try to protect, or we protected, are the behavior specialists, and then what we call a cadre, which is an instructional support assistant that has a little more preparation and training to support with behaviors. So we believe that the team will still be there, even though the loss will be felt of those additional hours that we have been able to provide up until now.
Thank you. Actually, I think I had because it's really hard to see, just the comprehensive list, right? And I know that this was shared last week, but can you speak a little bit, because I say graduation coaches, and just thinking about one of the board goals, right, being graduation. Can you speak a little bit to what some of the standing supports towards graduation would look like with these reductions?
Yes, thank you for that question. Some of the things that we're really working on is strengthening our early warning systems at the high school level. And you can see that as in part of the systems around 9th grade on track. And then also really working closely with our counselors, working closely with our administrators to ensure that we're tracking students and that we are providing the supports we need and getting kids in the classes they need when they need those, or getting the kids supports they need when they need them to graduate on time. But overall, we've been working very hard to just strengthen our overall system so that everybody plays a part in ensuring that students are getting what they need in terms of wraparound supports, instructional interventions, which you see in our classrooms, and also that we're flagging when students are stumbling. But the loss of grad coaches will be felt in the schools.
Thank you. Is that any changes to the school counselor composition at the secondary levels?
Right now, we're not planning any changes to the counselor composition, and we're also not eliminating all grad coaches.
Grad coaches, are those?
Excuse me. So you asked about grad coaches a second ago?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, so we're not eliminating that position, we're just reducing that position. I just wanted to make that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, I don't want to hog. Go ahead.
Do you have questions
I know.
from board members online? No, okay, thank you. Director Hudson, do you want to jump in?
So sorry, yes, bless you. So do you mind just the term in itself? I remember at first it's kind of like a sticker shock, but grad coaches, the word and the term itself, to me, I thought, oh no, this is another one that I assumed they were the only folks that did the duties that they do. And then when it was explained to me, it looked like there are a few different resources that do capture our children to help them out the door to college. So maybe it would also be helpful kind of elaborating on the definition of that as well. And then, I don't know, maybe you can talk about some of the other grad areas and positions that still exist that help capture some of that.
Yeah, thank you. So the grad coaches do play a vital role in following kids from 9th grade all the way through graduation to ensure that they are doing everything from getting the academic supports that they need. They're a trusted adult that work closely with kids, again, from when they enter school to when they complete school. And they really work as liaison for students. The way that we support students, in addition to grad coaches, is there's a team. And we work on Tier 1 supports all the way down to Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. Examples of our Tier 1 supports is working with our data teams on Wednesdays so that we can flag if students are a student performance and determine if students need certain supports. But also we have Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. Examples of that are our community outreach specialists, our school resource specialists who are able to work with the administration to identify students who have support, who need supports, and from there they do everything from check-in, check-outs with students to working with families, parents, or teachers to ensure that those students have the supports that they need. And so those are examples of how we are providing baseline level and systems to make sure we're tracking kids so they don't slip through the cracks, but also having a response system to ensure that we're working specifically with students for targeted supports they need in school. Grad coaches are a part of that as well, but we also have other staff members who do that too.
Thank you.
Chair, I have a couple more.
Yeah, go ahead.
No one, I mean, I don't want to.
No, you're fine.
So back to the license reductions, just wanted to know, I think that it was said that basically the ratio will hold in elementary. Could someone speak to a little bit of what this is going to feel like on the ground for secondary with the loss of these positions?
Thank you for that question. I'm actually going to kick that to both deputy superintendents because if we could expand it a little, I think it might be helpful for people to hear how ratio will hold at elementary and then a little bit more about secondary. So Deputy Superintendent Cobb, can we start with elementary?
Yes, absolutely. Currently at elementary, we have a ratio that is a little bit different for title and non-title schools, and that is how we allocate all of the FTE that goes to classrooms at schools. After that is allocated, a principal, for example, gets in a large school 24, 25 full-time equivalent positions for classroom. And then they start moving students into groups. If they have a dual language program or a bilingual program, some of those FTE, the full-time equivalent positions, will go into the bilingual strand. Some of those will go into the English-only strand or the ESOL strand. And that's how they start figuring out if they can have straight classrooms, a straight first grade, a straight second grade, or if they need blends, and we hear a lot about blends. We prefer to build our schools with as less blends as we can, but sometimes we do need, have the necessity to have some blends. The ratios right now for title schools are 25 in the K2 levels, 23 to 25, and then 3-5 levels, 25 to 27. In non-title schools, we have K2, kinder through second grade, about 25 to 27, and then 3-5, 27 to 29 students. So those are the numbers that we try to stay within and that we used to calculate how many full-time positions go to a certain school based on their enrollment. And right now, we were very happy to be able to maintain those current ratios and not add another student to the ratio.
I want to respond to the ratio question, and then also I was able to retrieve some additional really helpful resources around how we're supporting for the graduation, so I'd like to add that to that as well. At the secondary level, ratios may go up, or the ratio may go up based on these proposed reductions, but it won't be consistent across all of our buildings because there's a variance of one, the enrollment. Enrollment really varies, and then especially at the high school level, what the student's actual academic need is. An example of that is that we don't actually know how many Algebra 1s we're gonna need to offer next year until, one, we see how students perform at the end of this year to know if we need to offer a little bit more additional Algebra 1, and two, when we know how many students we're going to have in total. So it'll be hard to say what happens with our class sizes, but our ratios we anticipate might go up a little bit. Now I want to again come back to the graduation questions. So here are some supports that, and we talked about this earlier in the presentation, here are some supports that we use to really support with students graduating on time. We have built-in credit recovery programs in schools. We have summer schools. Summer school programming. When we track our seniors, we have a senior blitz in most schools, or senior supports is what we call them also, where we make sure that students are getting in the classes that they need and getting the supports that they need. And then also I really want to point out that our licensed staff do an amazing job at working with kids one-on-one and making sure that their needs are being met in the classroom. So those are some system-based supports that are present throughout all of our schools that will really help to ensure that our students have success in the absence of as many grad coaches.
And maybe college and career coaches, AVID and counselors, from what I've experienced with my high schools and my daughters. Really
Definitely
have
shout out
pitched
to
in
them
quite a
too.
bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know a grad coach even existed before, so thanks.
And I guess, follow up to that, do we feel confident that they will still be able to do all that one-on-one follow-up with the loss of the instructional mentors and so many FTE? Like, I get that that's how it's working in today's world. I'm trying to predict and understand more about what it's gonna look like next year.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't want to downplay the significance of what losing grad coaches will be, but I do feel confident that our high school teams have a lot of systems in place to backfill with some of the needs. I can't tell you what the impact will be with the loss of grad coaches, but I just want the public to know all the things that we have that support our kiddos.
Thank you. I do want to, unless there are other questions, transition over to public comment. You're good. Okay. Thanks, Superintendent and team, for that information. I think each one of you reiterated how difficult every one of these recommendations and possible reductions are. So also do appreciate hearing around what would remain, and trying to strengthen that or hold on to, but it's hard nonetheless. We'll go ahead and transition over to public comment at this point. We've provided an opportunity for public comment by call-in and Zoom and in person, as well as in writing. Tonight, our commenters are in person, and we'll have the 3-minute timer up on the screen as usual. The board has received written comment ahead of the meeting as well, and the written comment will be posted on the district website. We have 5 people who have signed up for comment this evening. And just want to also state for anyone who wasn't able to comment tonight, we do encourage folks to send in comments in writing, as well as to the board and/or email. We'll go ahead and start with first name on here, which is Marilyn Ellis. And then we have Jeff, is it Jeff Jabin? Jeb. And we'll find out if it's a hot mic or not.
Good hustle.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's good.
Good evening. My name's Marilyn Ellis. I am currently serving as the Salem-Keizer Education Association Vice President, and I'm speaking here on behalf of our members. So good evening, school board directors, superintendent, student advisor. I want you to know that I appreciate the tone and the words that have been spoken tonight so far, because this is a really big deal. This is going to change people's lives in a negative way in a lot of cases. It's going to have an impact on our community, our students, our families. So taking it seriously seems very, very fitting. It feels that way to me. Because it is so important and it is so serious, I think it has to be done right. And I don't mean a particular timeline or the selections. Those could always be debated. And we may, even among yourselves as a board, you may have different opinions about what is needed. I just think it is so critical that before any information is released, that it's accurate. This is when it's really harmful and potentially could lead people to make decisions that they didn't have to make if we give bad information. I'll just give you an example. Last week, we heard 3 different numbers from the district about the total number of licensed staff that were recommended for reduction. Those ranged from in the 230 range to as high as 239. And I know in the overall scheme of things, that doesn't sound significant. But if it comes down to those last, say, 9 people, it's pretty darn significant. So I just caution and encourage to all of you, or those of you making decisions and sharing information, take the time needed to get the information right before it's shared, because there's a high level of anxiety, as you can imagine, among multiple employee groups right now. I'll also tell you that this is my 3rd time in Salem-Keizer that we've gone through a reduction in force. I'm sure there have been many, many over the years, but in my time, this is the 3rd. So the first was the rollout and implementation of the Measure 5 property tax limitations. That one hurt a lot for 3 years in a row. It hurt, and it was really scary. And I was a new teacher, and I managed to survive. So I feel very fortunate for that. Then we experienced it again during shortly after the Great Recession. So in 2012, we said goodbye to hundreds of people. And here we are again. And I'm not saying that it is the fault of the district by any means. I think there's a much bigger picture here. But because we have been through this before, my caution and my encouragement is to be very careful about how and when
Continue.
information, that scared me, how and when information is shared, because many of those people will come right back to Salem-Keizer as we have openings in that next year. Relationships matter. Let's keep those, let's foster those, and let's hold those close to our hearts.
Thank you so much. And Tyler is after. No, you're. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Tyler's.
Okay. Good to go? Okay. My name's Jeff Jabin. I'm the Vice President of Ask ASB. I want to say thank you, Andrea, and board for your time. I know there's a lot of tough decisions that have been made. I know there's still a lot of tough decisions to make and conversations to have, and I'm looking forward to having those conversations. I'm really concerned about how this is going to affect our student-facing positions, our schools. The ratio for secondary sounds like it's up in the air. I work in a middle school. I know how thin everybody is already stretched. And I have a feeling that that's just going to get worse. And workload is a concern that I think we need to talk about. And then for the school-based health assistants, which I appreciate you speaking to, Ashley, diabetes, medications, injuries that happen throughout the day, all of these different things, how are those going to be taken care of in 2 hours, right? The school day is 6 hours long. You need 6 hours of health, support. So that's just a statement to let you know that. And then another thing, and I think Marlene touched on it, is transparency and accuracy. I think that transparency is really important, and I feel like there may be a lack of transparency in certain instances. I think there's things that people are trying to control, and I understand that. But I think in this moment, we're all trying to work together to figure out the best path forward. And so transparency and honesty and accuracy is incredibly important. And so I want to encourage all of you board members to ask all the hard questions, and I appreciated hearing that tonight. There were a lot of hard questions that were asked, and I appreciate that. Keep doing that, keep booking. And one of the other things that I also want to talk about is, the cuts are largely to instructional staff and teachers. There's some cuts to administrative level, and I know that you pointed out there's 13.5%. That looks like a big percentage, but when it comes to the financial impact of that, it's not as large as the rest. And there's a feeling on the ground in our schools that this district is very, very top heavy. So I think that there's it's important to take a real hard look at, is each and everything that's happening at the district administrative level necessary? Because one person in an administrative level, and it's nothing personal against anybody in those positions, could be 6 people in classified, right? And each person is important, as you know, in the schools. And so that's really all I wanted to say. I appreciate you guys giving me the time, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. Thank you.
So much for being here.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not even gonna try with the last name, Tyler, because I always butcher it. But after Tyler, we'll have Heather and then Jane Tichenal. Heather Witkowski and Jane Tichenal. I'm trying. Go ahead.
Good evening, school board chairs, directors, student advisors, and superintendent. I'm Tyler Skella-Lakeberg, the president for the Salem-Keizer Education Association, and I'm speaking on behalf of members. We know that these are difficult times. SKA recognizes that our state needs to provide more funding to our schools. We also recognize that we've had declining enrollment while maintaining staffing at a constant. SKA also recognizes that our district leadership in the past several years have made choices that have also contributed to this budgetary shortfall. We are in the business of educating students. The proposed cuts in front of you do not align to that purpose. 239 licensed staff positions to be cut, the majority are which are classroom teachers, representing about over 8% of all licensed positions, compared to 15 administrators positions, which represent a total of 7%. We need to preserve our classrooms. We need to preserve those who work directly in our schools serving our students. In the a couple years before the pandemic, we started receiving student investment funding that was supposed to go to reduce class size, caseloads, and increase supports for our students, meaning people working directly in our schools to serve our students. At the time, this district made choices to expand district level offices, creating more coordinator positions, director positions, and enlarging departments. So here we are. And now we have cuts before us. As you look at those cuts, we ask that each of you, as a board, you have some hard choices to make. When you look at a position, I want you to ask, is it a position in our school? Is it a position that directly works with students? If so, the choice should be simple. That position should remain. And look at what other positions exist in our district that do not work in our schools, that do not serve our students directly. We know in an ideal world, we would keep all these positions, but we don't have this luxury right now. SK asks that this board prioritizes our students and those who work directly with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather, are you with us?
Do I just start?
Jump in.
Thank you. Hello, board directors and student advisor. My name is Heather Rutkowski. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I teach middle school for the Salem-Keizer School District. I would like to ask you, board directors, to please pay careful attention to the positions that have been cut by the reduction in force process that Superintendent Castaneda is spearheading, and deeply question her choices during the process. I would ask you to request a complete named organizational flowchart for the school district, not simply the unsourced pie charts, and examine specifically every position that is not a building level student facing position. And then I would like you to question why every single one of those non-building level student facing positions is more vital to the educational success of Salem-Keizer students than the positions her team has chosen to eliminate. So far, she's chosen to cut both nurses and the hours of school-based health assistants. As elected representatives for the families of Salem-Keizer, have you considered how the families of students with ADHD, feeding tubes, epilepsy, diabetes, and other medical needs will feel about sending their students to our school district next year, or are they simply not? So far, the superintendent's team has chosen to cut instructional mentors, who are in fact the only mentors that exist for our school district after last year's new teacher mentor program was cut. These instructional mentors, based at each school site, have provided desperately important support for new educators, for educators adopting new curriculum, for staff handling extreme student behavior, and for whole school systems to follow processes laid out by the district.
Can you slow down a little bit for our interpreters? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am. So far, the superintendent has chosen to eliminate a disproportionate number of building and classroom educator positions while protecting and maintaining literally dozens of administrative departments and positions that fill the halls of the so-called professional centers, of which we seem to need 3, creating paperwork and professional development for classroom educators and school staff to complete while having little to no impact on the day-to-day education of our students. Her decision to begin the reduction in force with a disproportionate amount of cuts coming from classroom and building educators and administrators, and to begin the cuts with our instructional mentors, is unconscionable. We will become a school district where educators have no support. We will become a school district educators actively leave in order to foster their own growth and well-being. And we will become a school district no one wants to join as a result of her prioritization choices. As a person who left Arizona, which you can understand what Arizona's school system is like, because there was no mentoring, because I was a department chair my 3rd year of teaching, because no one else was left who was more veteran than me. I don't want to see our school district become that, and that is the direction these cuts will take us in. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Jane Tichenall.
My name's Jane Tichenall. I appreciate your time tonight. I didn't have much time to write anything today, but I just want to say this. I'm a mom, and I'm here to demand action. I want my school board to demand action, too. Depleting this district of so much funding and qualified staff will inevitably increase violence in our schools and decrease student ability to function academically and emotionally. I can assure you this depletion will have substantial adverse impacts on this generation of students. Superintendent Castaneda, you are the face of an historical moment that impacts thousands of people. You have many people watching you, waiting to hear how you will fight to demand the people in power take action now. So even if our state leaders refuse to see this crisis, refuse to address the youth need, let them and our district see you stand tall and advocate loudly and often for what's right. If we are limited in our funding, if we are limited in our staff, if we are limited in our student space, let our voice never know any limit as we stand loud and tall to fight together for our students, our families, and our community. Show this district and the state that this school board will advocate loudly and often for equitable funding for all of our students to thrive in a safe space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our public comment portion for the evening. At this point, I'll turn it back to Superintendent for closing remarks, additional comments, clarification.
I'll just close briefly because we will be back together again tomorrow. And I just want to say a little bit more about how this process will go. So obviously, we've heard really important comments tonight. More comments have been submitted. Tomorrow evening, we'll be back together. There'll be more opportunity for public comment and board deliberation. And then at that point, we will be asking them to consider the recommendation for reduction. This is moving fast, but it is also, we hope, an opportunity for people to see the information before us all, see how difficult and truly impossible these choices are. In many instances, I've had building administrators and teachers and neighbors ask, how will we be able to do everything with less? And for today only, I think we need to acknowledge that we can't do everything with less. We have to advocate for more. And that is why we so often are saying, this is just today's chapter. This is not where we land as a district. I will close just by thanking everyone who commented, everyone who has emailed us. We have read all of them over the weekend. And for those of you who submitted information today, I will just elevate Marilene's comments again. This is a moment of gravity because this is a moment that we and our system will remember for a long time. And it is important to get it right. And with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you. Just wanted to restate, we will be back tomorrow and we will take public comment once more. That's open until 3 tomorrow p.m., so we've extended that this time around. Just wanted to share that here as well, recognizing the change, but we just want to make sure that we get that we hear from anyone who wants to share their thoughts and reflections with us, so you are able to sign up for comment until 3 p.m. tomorrow as well. With that, again, just huge appreciation to everyone who's joined us, who sent questions, and to the district team for supporting us with a lot of questions, many which were not asked here today because we've been in ongoing conversations over the last couple weeks and months, of course, but it's hard. It's hard no matter what. And with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn. It is 8:30, 8:27. Thank you so much.